Hello and welcome to Open Your Mind Radio. You have myself, Alan James.
And you have myself, Stephen George. Good evening.
Good evening. It's Sunday the 8th of March 2015. I'd like to just say a thank you to Joan Flatley, who's going to be on our show in a couple of weeks' time. We were going to talk about addiction, but obviously we wanted to get Paul on. Our guest on tonight is Paul Murphy, TD. We'll be bringing Paul in a few minutes' time, but a big thank you to Joan for shifting the schedule around so we can fit Paul in on the show tonight. Now, before we get any further, we have a few things to talk about. Then we want to get Paul in to start talking about the Irish water and everything that's been going on. But before we do that, let's find out what the communication channels are.
Okay, communication channels, please, Mary.
The communication channels are email info@oymireland.com, by phone 046 927 1212, and you can also contact us direct through the OYM chat room.
Thank you, Mary. 046 927 1212 is the number for the studio this evening and every evening. If you're going to call in from outside Republic of Ireland, it's going to be 00353 469 271 1212. Yes, the OYM radio website. If you're, well, there's a few people logged into the chat already, so hi to all of you. Hi to all the people on People's Internet Radio as well. But people on the OYM radio website will see it's a new website, new layout. Alan has been working tirelessly on that during the week, dotting the I's and crossing the T's, or dotting the T's and crossing his I's and pulling his hair out. But it's all there, everything's running. We have the 3 streams up top. We have a pop-out stream as well, you will see, just beside the Facebook logo. Yet we have the Facebook there as well. You don't even have to navigate away from the site, just click there and Facebook is there. We also have down the bottom of the site as well, if I scroll down, we have the Facebook link if you need it, and we also have the link to the YouTube channel. And that's about the size of it. Oh, no. We also have the TuneIn Radio link as well for your listening pleasure on Android and Apple devices. Alan.
Brilliant, Steve. Right, now there's a couple of things that you probably see when you look at the website, that the players are kind of spaced out a little bit. There's a little bit of a problem with the actual stream and the time delay with one of the actual streams. So myself and Steve are going to be doing a bit of testing during the week because of the delay. We want it down to about 30 seconds if we can, but for some reason it was actually longer than that. But generally, the majority of the site is done. It's now up online. You can see it there as you're in front of you if you're logged into the chat facility there. And we are expecting a few teething problems on the site, so if you do come across any issues, email us and let us know if you can, and that would be great. We put the old OYM player up there so you can tune in, because as I say, the new OYM player is a bit lagging a little bit. We need to test it during the week, need to sort it out. Now, we also have a listeners gallery, photo gallery on the left hand side. So if anybody has any OYM stickers or t-shirts, or you print out an OYM logo and you're anywhere strange or wonderful or anything like that, take a photo and send it in to us and we'll get it up in the gallery. If you go over to the gallery now, you'll actually see a couple of photos there from listeners they just printed out the actual OYM logo and took a photo of it. So if you have a t-shirt, sticker, or just the logo itself, you print it out and you're anywhere interesting, by all means send it in to us and we'll get it up in the gallery. That'd be brilliant to do that.
And if you don't have a t-shirt or you don't have bumper stickers, you can get them. You'll see a link on the left-hand side saying OYM shop. You can pop in there. We've all sorts of goodies. We've bumper stickers, we have books, we have CDs. Well, we don't. We have one CD at the moment. But yeah, there's stuff you can purchase in there if you do so wish, and t-shirts as well.
Brilliant. And I've already I've also updated the actual smartphone app for OYM because of the changes to the links to the schedule and stuff like that. So if you do have the original OYM smartphone app, just remove it, download again from the Google App Store, and you'll have the latest version. So when you click on the schedule and PayPal, them functions work with the new links. Now, I think that's it. Yeah, that's just everything that's gone on with the site. We're not going to be talking about too much that went on during the week, because we are conscious that we want to get Paul in and start talking about things that are going on over here in Ireland. But before we do that, just a quick link over to yourself there, Steve. How's your week?
Grant, thanks very much. Would you like me to elaborate ever so slightly?
Just a little bit.
Right, okay. I did pop 2 links up in the chat room there earlier on I was going to say this evening, but today, for people to have a look at. That's just kind of something I was checking out during the week. Gardasil has come up on the radar again, and there's a link there. One of the links is actually a letter written by an Irish mother about her 17-year-old daughter, and it's relatively new. It's 7th of February, but it's a heartbreaking story of the mother, her journey through this vaccination, and the research she done beforehand and the research she done after, when her daughter became sick. Her daughter Laura's 17, but it's harrowing just to read it, because she got the vaccination, she had all the information from the HSC, WHO, and it wasn't right. But her daughter, she is kind of making recovery, and she is in Ireland in County Louth. And what actually led me onto that was I seen another link there today to say that over in Spain, people are actually taking pharmaceutical companies to court over in Spain. Seemingly, like in other countries like America, and I believe here as well, you can't actually take them to court because there's legislation in place that kind of it just it won't let you. It protects them, the pharmaceuticals. They're 100% protected, so there's not much you can do. But in Spain and other countries, that legislation is not there. Of course, it'll probably come in pretty quick. But people are taking cases where they have got this Gardasil vaccination. Their daughters have become quite sick, ill, and some have actually died. But they are taking these people to court, and I hope it's a big win for those people. I really do, because from what I've seen in relation to this vaccination, the research I've done, it's not good, because a lot of times these are fast tracked, and I believe Gardasil was one of those that was fast tracked. They done some testing, I think it's about like an 11-step program. They got to maybe step 3. It all looked good, so it was fast tracked and it hit the markets.
Well, you got 2 girls as well, so
I've got 2 girls.
You have a reason to be cautious.
Absolutely,
over it,
absolutely. And my daughter, when I'm sure she won't mind me saying this, but when that Gardasil vaccination was available in her school, I believe she was the only child in her year that didn't partake, because again she had seen the information. She's kind of clued in. She's very open-minded. Just one last thing in relation to schools. Again, this is something else I've been checking now. Common Core. Now, this has cropped up from time to time, and it's cropped up again. And I think it's kind of edging its way in here, if it's not completely in already. But there is a mom in Arkansas in the US of A. She's on record there. Karen Lamoureux, I believe is the lady's name. She had a meeting with the Board of Education in December 2013. It's kind of a bit of an old story, but it is kind of making headways again. Common Core, there's lots of videos out there on Common Core, and it's detailing how like maths problems are solved, and it's when you look at the way it's solved. I mean, you say 2 and 2. Well, 2 and 2 is 4. We know that. But Common Core, if you were to say on an exam, well, the answer is 4, you will be marked down. You won't get. That'll be incorrect. You got the right answer, but it's incorrect because you need to show how it's done. And in one of these questions, this lady said there's 108 different steps that need to be taken to prove that the answer is 5 or 4 or whatever the answer may be. And she said it's not. Common Core saying it's preparing people for college education, and she's saying no, it's dumbing people down.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's just the 2 things on my agenda. They're on the chat room there as well. They're on the top of the chat room. If you click on the links, you'll see exactly what I was looking at during the week. Anyway, how was your week?
Brilliant. Just a couple of things on my list. Going back to the Common Core, seeing that video from the lady in America. And it's funny because my son, when he's in school, and he's come home and started asking me about maths questions and stuff like that. And myself and my partner are looking at the question and going, why are they getting them to do the maths like that when we learned differently from years ago? That's not logical. The way we were trained was logical. So maybe that's the common purpose, Common Core coming in there, which is very, very strange. Anyway, just a couple of things. Apparently Irish Water have extended their deadline to register till the end of the year without penalty, apparently 2015. Maybe the whole kind of EU thing, in the EU they have to reach a certain criteria. Maybe Paul can give us a bit more information on this when we bring him in, and they have to reach a certain level of acceptance, a certain amount of funds coming in for for funding of Irish Water, and they haven't reached it yet. So hence the extension to 2015, the end of 2015. And basically with the jailing of the 5, I watched the video today, posted it up on the OYM Facebook page. One of the 5 was interviewed via the mobile phone and a PA loudspeaker outside of the jail. And they're doing fine. They seem to be doing fine, and no problem at all. And he said it's going to, if anything, enforce the whole kind of protest of Irish Water when they get out. So it's brilliant to see that, and fair play to the lads for that, you know. Again, we'll talk to Paul about that. The other thing in the Herald, the IE mentioned here that the Taoiseach is set to call an election for February of next year.
He's optimistic, isn't he?
Well, we wish it was sooner, but, you know, at the end of the day, we need, I'm sure there's, I won't say we, but parties out there, independents and parties need time to get their team together and get everything sorted. But, you know, if we don't get these governments, parties out, and I'll say government parties, so we had one party, Fianna Fáil, they made a mess of things. So they decided to have a coalition. So they had 2 parties, and the 2 parties made things even worse. So what's going to happen the next time? Are we going to have 3 or 4 parties getting together trying to fix the problem? You know, I mean, they're moving the deck chairs around the Titanic. That's what they're doing. So again, we'll talk to Paul about that. We'll bring you in. And just a quickie, that the United We Strike Radio Marathon is going to be on next Saturday as well. Myself and Steve now do a pre-record show for that, normally around the 7 o'clock mark, 7:30 mark, GMT. So if you want to tune in to the United We Strike Radio Marathon, that'll be on next week as well. So, Steve.
Yeah, just before we move on, I was asked to do something earlier, and before I forget why it's there, because, you know, the grey matter being what it is, and, you know, me not being a spring chicken anymore, I'll probably forget about it by the end of the show. So I was asked to give a shout out to Samantha. So Samantha, there's your shout out there.
Good. Okay.
Yeah, enjoy the show.
Okay, right. We're going to bring our guest in now. Our guest is Paul Murphy, TD. He's a member of a member of the Socialist Party and the Anti-Austerity Alliance. And Paul has been doing fantastic work regarding the Irish protests, and obviously he was involved with the Joan Bruton for our international people. And Paul was involved with the protests over here, and even had his top, I think, pulled off him. I'm not too sure who pulled it off. We'll find out from Paul who pulled it off. I think it was the Gardai who did it, and the poor bloke. But basically, fair play to Paul, what he's doing and standing up for the people, and that's exactly what an Irish politician should be doing, standing up for the people. And we had the issue, we talked about Ray Butler last week and what happened down in Trim with the National Citizens Movement. And basically it's disgraceful. And one of the things he said on Facebook was, I should be allowed to do my job. Well, Ray, you're not doing your job. That's why people are doing what they're doing. When you support the people, that's what you're supposed to be doing. But we'll find out more from Paul. Good evening, Paul. How are you?
Good evening. Thanks for having me on. I'm good.
No problem at all. Paul, thanks for coming on. You've been really in the thick of things with the Irish water protests. And you've really been getting the bashing from the mainstream media, which is bang out of order. Now, I believe that when you did the Tuppty interview, that you came out and there was no clapping, apparently. I mean, there probably a few people set up in the audience, but I want to talk about that. But before we do that, just tell us a bit about the Anti-Austerity Alliance and the Socialist Party and where you're coming from there.
Yeah, so the Anti-Austerity Alliance comes from the movement against the property tax, the campaign against the household and water taxes, but which primarily was focused on the household tax and then the property tax. And it was the campaign in certain areas of the country, particularly areas where the Socialist Party had an influence, decided to transform itself into a political organisation. We wouldn't allow all the austerity parties to just take all the seats in the local elections. And so in advance of the local elections, the Anti-Austerity Alliance was created to try and be a step towards, a significant new party of the left in this country that can actually represent working class people, which there's a complete absence of in the context of the sellout of the Labour Party. We obviously did well in the local elections, getting 14 people elected as councillors. We won a by-election with Ruth Coppinger getting elected in Dublin West. And then subsequently, in October, we won the by-election in Dublin Southwest, where afterwards I became a TD. And so it's the idea of, really building a movement for ordinary people, for the 99%, not just based on getting people elected and people speaking out in the Dáil or whatever, but about using those positions to mobilise people outside the Dáil. For example, with the water charges, seeing that the crucial thing here is massive civil disobedience, a massive boycott of the water charges. That's how we're going to win. And so basing itself on struggle outside the Parliament, outside the councils, as well as, trying to use those things as a platform, and fundamentally fighting for, a revolution in our country, and across Europe, whereby power lies with the majority as opposed to the current minority.
Okay. Tell us about what happened because I want to get to the kind of Ryan Tubridy interview and what happened there, but what led up to that is the whole idea that, you were protesting there when Joan Bruton was in Jobstown. Tell us what happened there, Paul.
Yeah, so that was we heard, it went around on Facebook basically, that Joan Bruton was coming on Cusson, which is like a further education, kind of adult education place in West Tala in Jobstown. And it went around that she was coming for the graduation ceremony. That was because many of the students found out about it and were appalled. Some refused to attend because of what Joan's responsible for, not just in terms of the water charges, but in terms of like the lone parent allowance being cut now, in terms of child benefit cuts, in terms of the betrayal of people over a whole series of years. And so then a protest was called by residents in Jobstown. It still wasn't clear, I have to say, if she was coming or not. It looked like she was coming, but it wasn't guaranteed. So then I came out to the protest. Other anti-austerity alliance people were there. Many people, just from the community were there. Anti-water charges activists, others. She came in, she walked past people, people, shouted traitor at her. She was hit wrongly, in my opinion, with a water balloon, but that's the most serious thing that happened to her. And I think it's not, it's not the kind of crime of the century that sections of the media are making it out to be.
Yeah.
And then she went in, she moved from the graduation, she moved from there into church, got into a car, people surrounded the car, there was a protest, there was the car which I participated in, then over a period of a couple of hours the crowd got bigger and bigger, so it might have started about 50 people.
Paul, can we
people. So it was a real...
Paul, can we just stop you there? The actual link is getting very bad with Skype, as we predicted. We might have to go back to the actual your laptop. Is your laptop set up there, ready to go?
It is.
It is. Okay, let's. Well, I'm just going to get Steve to disconnect you, and then what we're going to do is we'll get you back on Skype on your laptop if we can do that, if you have it ready.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, it's ready to go. Yeah. Sorry about that.
Okay, brilliant. That's okay, no problem at all. Okay, we'll just disconnect Paul on Skype and we'll reconnect on his laptop. Just before we went live on the show, we did a bit of testing, and there was a little bit of an echo on the actual Skype, so we decided to go with his mobile hands-free, I believe. But we obviously there's a problem there, so we'll see how we get on. Paul, are you there?
Yep, is that any better?
Oh yeah, that's better. Yeah, that's much better. Yeah. Sorry, Paul. It's just the quality was bad, and obviously the listeners want to hear what you have to say there. So if you want to take it from the whole, Joan Bruton going to Jobstown.
Yeah, and so I mean, ultimately, to get to the essence of it, there was a sit-down protest behind her car. There was people chanting, anti-water charges slogans, shouting traitor because of the betrayal of everything that they supposedly stood for, including opposition to the water charges, and a slow march in front of her car for a period of, I think maybe 2.5 hours it went on for. And it was a large protest, but by the time it finished there were 700 people there. It was a legitimate expression of the serious anger that people have about Joan Bruton, about the Labour Party, about the government, about the water charges. And at the time, you had a very heavy police presence. The riot police came in at one stage, then were withdrawn. But then afterwards, there was rumours that people might be arrested or whatever. But it went on then 4 months later that then they began to round people up. We think 23 people so far arrested under mostly charged or arrested under suspicion of false imprisonment, with a file now going to the DPP, and they'll decide if we get charged or not.
That's just incredible. That, I mean, well, it's just unbelievable that our politicians, that Ireland has got to this stage in 2015, that, you know, years ago, it's something that I mentioned before, the politicians, you could go down to the clinics, or if you've seen them on the road, you could go up and have a chat with them and everything else. Now it's like they're surrounded by people and protection, and they just don't, and people are calling them names and saying things and the whole lot, and there they are smiling away as if, you know, as if everybody's there cheering them on. And, you know, I'm not too sure. I mean, I think the PR company for the government party should be sacked anyway, because they're doing a terrible job. But, you know, I just said to you there before we went live, you must feel frustrated in the Dáil, as most of us do, when we hear these sound bites coming from Enda Kenny and Joan Bruton and everybody else in there from these, you know, main parties. And you just want to pull your hair out and think, but why are you saying this? Nobody believes you anymore. You know, and I'm sure I'd love to, maybe they will listen to the show somewhere down the line, but nobody listens to them anymore. We don't believe what they're saying. And they just keep churning this stuff out, you know, time and time again, and we just don't believe what they're saying, because...
Yeah, but they believe what they're saying.
They believe
their own PR.
They believe in their own PR. So you must be going mad and must want to run down there and shake Enda Kenny, but you must have the patience of a saint, along with everybody else, with Claire and Mick Wallace and Joe and stuff like that. I'm sure you want to go down and say, why are you talking like that? Nobody actually agrees with you.
Yeah, I mean, what a lot of the things that have happened recently illustrate just how fundamentally disconnected they are from the lives of the majority of people in this country. That's how they can convince themselves that austerity is working, that you have a big recovery taking place, and based on statistics that are inaccurate in terms of the reflection of what they actually say about the real economy. So they're really disconnected. It's why they think it's a good idea to go and arrest people for participating in a protest, to potentially charge people with false imprisonment, which is an incredible stretching that I'm not aware of ever previously happening. You know, people being charged with false imprisonment for participating in a protest. It is unprecedented. But in terms of like frustration in the Dáil, like obviously it is frustrating to listen to them. But I suppose the main point is that, look, I'm not in there to talk to and try and convince Enda Kenny or Joan Burton or any of them. You know, it's really not my job. There's no way of convincing them. They can't be convinced.
Yeah.
Even if they knew the reality of people's lives, right? Because that's not who they represent. They're voted in, you know, particularly the Labour Party, by working class people, by ordinary people, but it's not who they represent. Fundamentally, these people represent the interests of the likes of the Dennis O'Briens, big business, bankers, bondholders. That's who they represent. So when I'm in there, I'm not really trying to persuade them. I'm trying to use the Dáil as a platform to speak to people outside, and that's kind of how you have to keep yourself kind of focused. Otherwise, you get lost in kind of the parliamentary games that the rest of them are caught up in.
Exactly, yeah. Oh, well, fair play to you for doing that. Now, there was a protest the other day where everybody went down to RTE, because we know that RTE are a semi-state body, and they are basically the soundboard for the government. So when you were asked to go on to RTE to Ryan Tubridy, I believe, I was told, I've seen part of it, but not all of it, unfortunately. I have to go and watch it. But I believe when you came out, nobody clapped.
I don't remember. I think they did clap when I came out. I saw comments and stuff on the internet. I think they clapped when I came out and they clapped when I left, as far as I remember. Obviously, it's a bit of a blur.
Yeah.
I think the point being made is that the whole thing was very silent. There was no clapping in the course of the interview. And I saw something going around on Facebook suggesting that the audience had been told not to clap during the interview. If anyone has any information about that, I'd be very interested to hear it. I don't think it's impossible, but I don't think it's the most likely situation, because I think it's such a thing is likely to get out.
Yeah.
You know, and I think more it just reflected like the awkwardness of the interview. Do you know what I mean? Whereby he was trying to kind of badger me into saying certain things in a style that was not usual for the Late Late Show. And so I think probably people were just a bit kind of bemused as to what they were meant to do. If you know what I mean, there weren't like obvious places to clap and stuff. I think it's hard to know, obviously.
Yeah. Well, what's going around the internet is that there was more like the Spanish Inquisition rather than an interview.
Yeah. I mean, that's the nature of what they do. The role of the establishment media, you know, is that it's a reflection of, you know, because it's not the only program. You can go to 6-1 News, even Vincent Brown in relation to the Joan Bruton protest. They all reflect the establishment view that kind of masses of people being angry and protesting is dangerous. It's a dangerous threat to the established order of politics, and then they're out to demonise it effectively.
Okay, Steve, you have a question there.
Yeah, Paul, just briefly, when you were on the Late Late Show, as I said to you a couple of weeks back when I was lucky enough to meet you in Kells, we all know that Mr. Tubridy wears an earpiece, and he has a team of people, or probably one or more people anyway, telling him what to say and what questions to ask. And I'm pretty sure that he didn't just dream up all the questions himself. But did you meet him before the show or after the show when he hadn't got his earpiece in? And if so, was it the same guy who interviewed you, or was he a different person?
Well, I met him briefly when I was coming into the studio. I had a brief, you know, friendly chat with him.
Yeah.
And then I didn't see him afterwards because, I mean, he still continued the show, and I obviously left. I didn't hang around in the green room afterwards. Did he come up with all the questions himself? No, presumably not. I mean, you see, it's like, I don't know Ryan Tubridy, you know? I don't know the man from Adam, and he doesn't know me, and he could be the nicest man in the world, I don't know. But, like, he has a role to play, right? And his role is, he's the one who's throwing the snowballs. You know, someone else is making them, passing them to him, and he's the one that's throwing them, in terms of attacks on things that are seen to threaten the establishment. And someone can be the nicest person in the world, but they're part of a group of people, which generally the main people in the media are, which share the kind of the world view, you know, of, broadly speaking, the establishment. And, you know, I think he probably believed the line of questioning he was going down, I think, in the sense that I just think you'd be surprised how scared these people actually are. And you get a glimpse of it. I mean, if you read kind of Stephen Collins' columns in the Irish Times, that these people really fear what they refer to as the mob, you know? That what's happened in Irish politics in the last 6 months in relation to the water charges, all happened coming through the water charges, of people stepping outside the framework of how they're meant to get involved in politics, which is voting in elections every 4 or 5 years. The fact that people are getting organised for themselves, the fact that people are protesting, the fact that people are prepared to boycott. It's just, you know, the 1% and those who represent them and those who share their outlook are genuinely quite scared in this country, and they're trying to do damage to those who are seen to represent that movement, even though it backfires on them continually. But I think that's, you know, effectively the explanation.
Do they not see the hypocrisy in all of this? That, you know, I mean, the great thing what happened with Irish Water and Phil Hogan in a positive way is that he's managed to wake up so many people across Ireland. It's fantastic. And what's happening is people who have for years been law abiding and did everything that they were told to do and everything else, all of a sudden are looking at the government in a different light, seeing the hypocrisy for what it is and saying, hang on a minute, I'm not putting up with this. If they're turning around and doing what they're doing and then they want me to do something else, sorry, but I'm not having that. And you know, Irish people with the best will in the world, when they have a bee in the bonnet, they definitely have a bee in the bonnet and they make a stand. And I think that's what's happening.
Absolutely. I mean, it's like, you know, it's the one thing you'd agree with Andy Kenny on, that it's not just about water. It's water has become the issue that, like, all of the accumulated anger and discontent over 6 years of austerity has now exploded to the surface on. It's become the channel that all that kind of anger could run through. And I mean, one of the reasons that all that anger built up and didn't have a previous outlet is because people rightly felt betrayed by trade union leaders. They felt that at the start of the crisis there were a couple of significant protests, so it's not that people didn't protest at all, but then effectively people were told to go home. There was no strategy for victory. once then the Labour Party came into power, the main trade union leaders devoted themselves to defending Labour and government effectively. And so there was no real outlet for people to fight, and people got actually demoralised to a reasonable extent because of the absence of a fight back. But then the water charges came along as an issue whereby people could fight themselves. They didn't need trade union organisation to do it. They could organise in their communities. They could boycott. You know what I mean? The thing is relatively simple. They want your money. You don't have to give it to them. You can protest against it. And so it just became this opportunity. And you can see, I mean, the impact of struggle. Whenever people realise that they actually have a lot of power in this situation, when they realise they can defeat austerity policies, the power to really transform politics in this country, you can see it. And it is, and it has huge consequences well beyond the water charge. And it's why they're right to be scared as well, you know?
Yeah, well, I think that it's gone beyond the water charges. I think, with over probably 50,000 in the first 6 months of this year with all the repossessions, and the government actually ignoring the Constitution. I mean, I've been involved and doing some helping out with the National Land League down in Trim Court, and just talking to people there and suggesting that they contact the likes of the Hub or the National Land League for help to stay in the houses and stuff like that. So, and when you see the stress and the worry at these people that they're going into court, you don't know what to expect. And the whole idea of the cronyism in the system, where you have a local registrar who then becomes a sheriff, and there's money made after repossessions and everything else. We're going into massive detail. General, that's really what's going on. And when you see this, you think, well, this is just ridiculous. How can these people, what's their mindset where they can just put people's feelings aside? They've no empathy, no morals. It's just pure greed. And this is what seems to be controlling all of them and pushing all of them.
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to class interests that the landlord class, the big landlord class in this country, together with the big corporations represented, in the hate figure that is Dennis O'Brien, they have an interest in one thing, which is profit. That's how the system operates. They're not meant to. In fact, it's illegal for major corporations to be concerned about things like morality or whatever. You know what I mean? Their goal is to provide profit for their shareholders. That's the purpose of being. That's their interest. The media, both private and public, generally reflects the same interest. And the major political parties, which are funded by and connected by 1,000 strings to those big business, corporate, 1% interests, also do the same thing. I mean, that's fundamentally what it's all about. And you see, the nature of that system called capitalism expresses itself in various brutal ways domestically, in terms of people being thrown out of their houses into homelessness because they can't afford mortgages or they can't afford rents. It's a huge problem right now. You see banks, obviously, as well. You see people being imposed with water charges, which are effectively to pay the bondholders and to drive towards privatisation of Irish water. But also, internationally, the same system has the same brutal results, of wars for oil, wars for profit, that result in the deaths of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people around the world, enforced poverty in large parts of the world through unfair trade deals in the interest of, the 1% in the rich countries. So it comes down ultimately to the way the whole society is constructed. And that's why we need to struggle on each of these issues individually, on the evictions, on the rents, on the water charges, on austerity, but also that's where the idea of fighting for fundamental social and socialist change comes into necessity, because we can win on each of these things, but as long as they maintain economic and political power, they'll come back with other things. There'll be other new attacks, and we have to see whether out of the likes of the anti-water charges movements or the movements that will be taking place against evictions, whether more and more people can become involved more generally.
Yeah, I think with the Dennis O'Brien fiasco and the whole lot and everything that he's kind of has his fingers in, I think we're more of a fascist state now, to be honest with you, because it's definitely the corporates controlling everything, and the Kenny is saying, how high, do you want me to jump, because that's what seems to be going on. I mean, for 5 people to be jailed because they're protesting over water, and yet all the bankers and all the corruption and the devastation they've caused, this country, and the suicides in the country are just unreal. But yet they have the hypocrisy to jail 5 people for protesting, with everybody else getting off. I mean, do they not see this? Are they not aware of this? I mean, do they think that they're doing the right thing?
Well, you see, they are doing the right thing from the point of view of their class interests. Do you know what I mean? And the tops of the guards and the judiciary reflect those interests as well. Well, except for the fact that they're making a strategic mistake.
Yeah.
But the state has always, and the Gardai have always, when it comes to the crunch, defended the interests of the rich and powerful, as have the media. I mean, you think about Rossport, and what happened there. I mean, I spent a fair bit of time in Rossport and the areas nearby. Was brutal. I mean, the Rossport 5 spent, I think, over 90 days in prison for the breach of an injunction, similarly to what's happened to the Irish Water people. And then after that, actually, Shell took a decision that they didn't want. They didn't want anybody else to be arrested and to become martyrs. And the Gardai, joined in with that decision. And so instead, you had a policy for a period of months, years even, of just Gardai behaving brutally against protesters continually, but in, an isolated rural community when you didn't have the prevalence of social media to get those kind of stories out. And so largely they got away with it. But what they were doing there was defending the interests of Shell and Statoil, defending the giveaway of our oil and gas resources, and defending the building of an unsustainable, unsafe onshore refinery in order to maximise profits for those corporations that have just got our oil resources and gas resources for free. But that's what happens again and again. But what's new in this situation, I think, is that there's so many people active and involved and involved in making the news for themselves, as well as seeing it then on social media, is that people are seeing it. Like, a large number of people are seeing the reality of the nature of the state, the nature of the media, for the first time.
Yeah.
That's what makes it.
Yeah.
That's what means that what they're doing is mistaken, even from their own point of view, just tactically mistaken, because they're overstepping the mark. They're exposing themselves. Like, the figure, it's a bit like what you're saying about Phil Hogan. Like, the fact that Dennis O'Brien so brilliantly encapsulates the media, political, and corporate nexus in one person, actually works in our favour, because it just makes the whole system very, very clear for people. That's how the whole thing works. There's Dennis O'Brien owning GMC Sierra, getting the injunction, getting prisoners jailed, also just so happens to own the Irish Independent, which then writes negative stories about those who were jailed. The whole thing is so blatant.
Yeah. Well, this is the great thing. People are beginning to wake up to it now and see it for what it is. And it's brilliant that so many people are seeing it. I mean, I feel sorry for the people who don't see it or who are involved in it, because the one thing that we can be sure of, and times it tells us this, that, change is inevitable. And what's going on now? I mean, we know there's a party whip system. Everybody, the world and his wife knows now there's a party whip system. And, if a politician in a party, say Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, Labour, and they want to go against the grain and they disagree with something, well, there's a potential there that the party whip will actually sack them if they don't, toe the rope. Now, we all know there's a party whip system, and we're trying to educate everybody out there, and that's why we put the joke out there. How do you know when somebody knows nothing about politics? Well, they vote for a mainstream party. Because if you actually knew that your vote, if you vote for one of them parties, it doesn't make any difference whatsoever, that the whip system will dictate what's going to happen, and that be fed down the chain. So, and this is why what we're trying to do is wake up people to the electoral system. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't vote, because the only thing we really have at the moment, apart from chaos, is to vote. And I just see that as each vote is a bullet in a gun, and the more bullets you have, the better chance you have of hitting the target. But as long as the voting is done and the vote counting is monitored and checked, because we've seen the actual the Scottish voting that went on, and we've seen footage of a woman switching the votes. So I'm sure there's a possibility of, if we were going to do that, if they were going to do something, they would actually do that. And this is why I'm concerned about them calling an election. So they're getting their team together. And the same, as I say, I think it was Scottish devolution, wasn't it? That's when the voting was rigged. And I'm concerned that might happen, because when they did the actual Lisbon Treaty vote and they said, oh no, you got it wrong that time, we're going to ask you again, there was certain footage of down in Cork of boxes being brought in and boxes being brought out. And I'm still not sure about that. I'm sitting on the fence on that one, but that would be the main concern. And I'm sure maybe you're thinking the same thing.
Well, look, people should vote and use their vote, particularly in referendums, but also in elections, because if we have more voices in the Dáil, in councils, who are arguing against austerity, against the establishment line, using those positions to try and get those ideas across, give people confidence to struggle, mobilise people, that's a big assistance. And I think people can say, the fact that we won the election in Dublin South West, it has been a significant enough boost to the anti-water charges protest movement, because it really showed to the establishment parties, and it also even showed to Sinn Féin, that if you don't seriously fight against water charges, you can lose your seats. But having said that, I do think that people have more power than as voters by being active in their communities, in their trade unions, in whatever scheme that they can be. I mean, the fact that the transformative thing in Irish politics in the past 6 months, and the reason, for example, that we won the by-election in Dublin South West, is because people have become active outside the framework of just elections. People discovering their own power, people protesting, people getting organised. And for me, I mean, the high point of this movement is not the big protests, although I think they're, brilliant, amazing. But the thing that is more significant is precisely, the street meetings, the community meetings, just that level of self-organisation of communities coming together. It's a very, very powerful thing. And that combined with an electoral struggle is the kind of thing that, can build a very, very powerful movement. Because ultimately I don't think change will come about from, above, from parliaments or whatever. It comes about from below, from ordinary people getting organised. If you think of any significant progressive change we have, you think about minimum wage legislation, you think about trade union rights, you think about the right to vote, you think about the extension of that right to vote. All those things ultimately were passed in Parliament. But they weren't passed in Parliament because the members of Parliament were persuaded by logical argument. They were passed in Parliament because the Parliaments came under massive pressure from movements from below. And that's always the case. And there needs to be as many as possible people in there who are representatives of those movements, reflecting that in the Parliament. But you need to keep your eye on, building that movement. And so that's a big difference between, say, ourselves and Sinn Féin. Sinn Féin is telling people, okay, put us into power, we'll sort everything out. Whereas we're saying, look, people need to sort these things out, and we want to help people to sort these things out. But it's the people themselves, working class people, small farmers, unemployed people, and they're the people who need to take power into their own hands.
Well, it's a typical, the people who got you into the trouble shouldn't be the same people that get you out. And, doing the same thing over and over again, looking for a different result, is not going to happen. It doesn't work. And that's what we're doing here. But see, it's the golden circle. It's the 1%. I said to the NCM people last week that, and they agreed, and I think everybody can agree that the people at the top are making a lot of money, and it's nice and cushy for them, and things are fine for them. So they don't want the system to change, and they will fight for the system to stay the way it is. And this is the problem. And people keep saying, well, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? Why don't you do this? So we got a call coming in. Steve, do you want to take that? And basically, but it's not going to, they don't want the system to change because it suits them. And they don't have morals, they don't have any empathy, so they won't really they don't want the system to change. I'm just going to work out, do we want somebody to come on? Okay, so that's the way I see it, Paul, and I'm sure everybody else sees it as well, that these people at the top, how many millionaires have been made over the last few years, especially with the Celtic Tiger in Ireland? So why would they change something when, they're on the gravy train?
Exactly. I mean, if you look at the Sunday Independent rich list today, I can't remember the exact figure, but I think the top 300 are now up to, I think it's 85 billion between them, and in 2010 they were around 50 billion. Right, so even in the course of the crisis, the wealthy have gotten wealthier, and that's the point: is that austerity has worked. It's worked for the very wealthiest in our society, and that's who it was always intended to work. Austerity is not fundamentally about making our economies better or whatever. It's about wealth transfer from the mass of people to effectively the capitalist class and their hangers-on. And they will pursue policies, and the parties that represent them will pursue policies that are absolutely in their interests. And they also don't care about democracy. I mean, I think by and large, elections in capitalist democracy are legitimate in the sense that the votes, generally speaking, I'm not saying there can't be this and that, but generally speaking, the votes are counted, etc. But elections are obviously dominated by money, and money comes from a few sources, most of which are corporate. And they're dominated by the media, which plays a role in framing electoral debates in certain ways. But secondly, I mean, it's precisely the point, like our voting again in referendums or what's happened to the Greek government, is that even where people take democratic decisions to take some power out of the hands of the 1%, those decisions are not respected by the establishment in all its different guises. And it's consciously undermined, regardless of how much democratic legitimacy those things have. And it really is the lesson. These people don't care about our democratic decisions, and they'll subvert them in any way they can.
And plus, for all the nepotism that goes on in government anyway, and you know, Enda Kenny hiring his family, friends, uncles, aunts, you know, Gardner, everybody who will actually toe the rope is brought in into the stable, and obviously given the job, so they'll carry on, you know, the legacy, I suppose. But listen, I'm sure we have loads of questions, so we're going to start on the questions because we can try and get through as many as we can. Steve?
Yeah, we do have loads of questions, Paul. It's great information, both people on the OYM chat room and also on the People's Internet Radio chat room. Very, very fired up about this hot topic, and lots of questions for you. So we're going to just kick it off in no particular order, but this one came in from Chris. Chris is a long-time listener on the OYM chat room, and he's wondering if, can you ask Paul, if after the next general election the Anti-Austerity Alliance have a few seats, which parties would Paul not go into government with if AA held the balance of power?
Okay, well, we definitely wouldn't go into government with Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael or Labour, with any of the establishment parties. In all likelihood, unfortunately, we wouldn't be in a government with Sinn Féin because Sinn Féin wouldn't agree to a sufficient left programme. And that's the point, is that it isn't about personalities or political or parties or whatever. It's about, we need a government in this country that's willing to break the rules of the economic and monetary union, as in repudiate debt, say this isn't our debt, we're not going to pay it, say we're going to have major public investment to create jobs, say we're going to shift taxation burden significantly onto the wealthy, say we're going to use public ownership of the banking system in the interest of the economy. We need a radical left government, and that's the kind of government that we would be interested in participating in as a step towards socialist change. If Sinn Féin was to agree to such a programme, we would go into government. But I think, unfortunately, that's not the nature of the party that Sinn Féin is. So I think in those circumstances where Sinn Féin had a majority and where people looked to Sinn Féin and had hopes that Sinn Féin would do things in terms of breaking with austerity, we'd be sensitive to those feelings. And so we'd have to discuss it, and we'd have to see exactly what basis Sinn Féin was looking to govern on. But in those circumstances, we may well vote for Sinn Féin Taoiseach, allow Sinn Féin to come to power, while sitting in the opposition benches and effectively saying that, look, if you implement things that are in the interest of ordinary people, that break from austerity, we'll vote for those things. But if you don't do that, if you vote against those things, then we'll vote against you and we'd bring the government down. Ultimately, that's if the numbers were there for that kind of government.
And what about direct democracy, that particular module of government that we've spoken about on OYM before, and we know that it was originally part of the Irish Constitution, whereby we could hold, if we had 75,000 signatures, I believe, we could actually call a referendum, and if politicians weren't, keeping their promises, there was recall, and we could have them removed. I mean, what's your thoughts on that, on the direct democracy module?
I mean, socialists like us are some of the first direct democrats in the world. The model of a socialist state is precisely based on a very different form of democracy than we currently have. And so at the moment you've elections every 4 years dominated by money. You vote for candidates, they do whatever they want, you can't recall them, you can't do anything about it, they're on huge salaries, and then you rinse and repeat and do it all over again in 5 years' time. So in a socialist democracy, First of all elected representatives are on the average wage of the people they're meant to represent, which is obviously something we currently do, where I'm on an average young worker's wage. But also everybody is recallable. They're effectively delegates from local, popular assemblies in communities, in workplaces, wherever, and they're recallable at any stage whenever they no longer represent the interests of people. And so the kind of model of democracy that we would have is a much more participative democratic model, whereby decisions are made at the lowest level possible by the mass participation of the community. And then where necessary, you have people delegated to higher bodies to make decisions that have to be made on a national level, and which obviously some decisions do have to be made at that level, or at a European level, or at a world level, or whatever. And so it's a very different model from the model of parliamentary democracy, whereby effectively politics is kind of a professional occupation of a very small minority of people, and it's their job to do it, whereas the idea of a socialist democracy is that it's the job of everybody to be involved in discussions and debates about all these things, including through referenda, but also through participation in their local assembly, local bodies, in terms of deciding all these things.
I think that's a very good answer. I mean, look, I agree that the majority of people should be held responsible. They should have a say in determining their own future and what direction the country goes. And I mean, look, we only have to look back to 2008, and we know that the current government, or the government that were in there at the time, and they made this decision when they were all probably half drunk. I don't know. I'm not saying they were, but they made a bad decision. And again, I think that's one of those things that if we had the direct democracy module, that there would have been someone there on that night when they were issuing this bank guarantee and the X amount of years of austerity, that there would have been some level-headed individual there who said, well, that's great, lads, this is what we want to do. However, we're going to have to put it to the people. We're going to have a referendum. We're going to have to put all the cards on the table. And I think that I believe myself that is the way forward, and that's why I actually support that kind of module of government, which is direct democracy. Now, as Alan and I have said before, we know that there is the party or the political service direct democracy, and that's one of their kind of the backbone of their being, if you like. And I'm not saying we support any particular party, but anyone who wants to give the power back to the people, I think they will get our support every time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the way that'll happen is, in my opinion, primarily through people themselves getting involved. I mean, that's the key point. That's what will transform politics, is by people themselves getting involved. And it's a point about, a future socialist democracy that has this system, is that actually you need to create the space for people to be involved in politics. It's one of the reasons that you'd have to have, a reduction of the working week without a reduction in salaries, in order to enable people to really participate fully in deciding what happens in their society. And if you look at the healthiest days of the Russian Revolution, you did have mass participation in politics, mass political discussion about, okay, well, what's going to happen, recallability of delegates, etc. That obviously degenerated into, a Stalinist nightmare. What you do, if you go back to the earliest days of the Russian Revolution, you get a glimpse of, okay, how that kind of model of real participation and real decision making by people could operate.
Yeah, you can kind of see when you look back at how, when as you said there, you can kind of look forward and say, well, if that was still in our constitution today, things will be a hell of a lot different. You can actually then understand why the government, I think it was in 1937, I'm not 100% sure, you can actually see why they removed it from the constitution, because it would have been bad for them, really.
Well, the government wants to avoid as much democratic check as they possibly can.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The only thing I'd say is that, I'm for the right of referendums, or for the right of people to call referendums. We put that forward during the Shanid referendum debate, for example. But in general, if you can have a model whereby people are actively involved, as in through participation in local assemblies or whatever model, but people actually go, listen to debates, speak themselves, etc. It's a higher and more participative form than referenda. Referenda can be a little bit passive in the sense that you sit at home, you receive your news through the media, whatever, you go out and vote. Whereas, and I think there can be cases where you need referenda, absolutely, and I'm for more referenda than we currently have. But if there are higher forms of democracy than referenda, in the sense of you can actually have decision-making power really resting with people, and people grappling with those decisions and discussing them and having, real debates in society about these things. Whereas right now, I mean, even in terms of the limited democracy that we do have, right? But the key decisions in this country are not even made by the Dáil or by the government. The decision about how many jobs are created, the decision about what investments happen, the decision about what kind of economic activity we have in this country. None of those decisions are made by anybody who's elected whatsoever, even with all the flaws of the election system. That they're made in boardrooms of big business, and they're increasingly made on the financial markets. And their only decision is not people's democratic wishes or people's interests, is profit. And that's the point, that's why, in order to have a real democracy and economic democracy, you need to take those institutions and sources of power out of the private hands of tiny minorities and into public democratic ownership, into the control of, the mass of people.
Absolutely. Just something just crossed my mind there, Paul. With all this stuff that's going on in relation to Irish water and everything else that's going on, and Denis O'Brien's name being bandied about, has Mr. O'Brien come forward at any point in time or put anything down on record recently?
Not that I'm aware of. There's a little piece about him today in the rich list. He's number 3. He's the richest Irish-born person. But obviously tax exile as well. Yeah. But no, I haven't seen anything anyway of him responding. Obviously, he has plenty of avenues to do so, both directly and indirectly, if he chooses to.
Yeah, we'll have to give a shout out there to Denis O'Brien. If he wants to come on, you're more than welcome, Denis. We'll have a chinwag with you. Paul, just speaking...
Can I just jump in there? Wasn't there... Michael Newland's going to be questioned by various TDs, I believe. That went through the Dáil, or went through a committee meeting there in the last couple of days, I believe. Paul, I don't know whether you heard about that. That there's going to be questions to Michael Noonan, which is probably going to, throw his toys out of the pram because he doesn't want to be questioned. But apparently an independent TD actually managed to organise that he get pulled in and be questioned about his shenanigans and what's been going on with Denis O'Brien. I don't know whether you heard that, Paul.
I didn't. It doesn't mean it isn't happening, though. I don't know, to be honest, but I'll take your word for it.
Okay, no problem. Steve.
Yeah, we spoke just briefly, Paul, before we actually went live, about hecklers in the Dáil, and I think anyone who watches any of these government programmes, I can't remember what the UK one is called, but I remember finding it on Sky once, the Parliament channel or wherever the hell it was, and there was someone trying to speak, and there was all this heckling going on in the background. Now, from what you've told us, and our government are no different with all the heckles, and like when you're up speaking, or any of the other independents are up speaking, I'm sure there's a lot of heckling going on. But that aside, when you're in there, you walk into a room, you can chat with a couple of people, you can generally get a feel for the room. When you're in the Dáil and you're putting your argument across, or any of the independents, what's the general feeling? If you had to read the room, how would you read the room? Do you reckon the government are they just kind of taking it all, it's water off a duck's back, or do you reckon that there is any fear in there?
Yeah, I think there's two things. I think there is fear. It's not fear of like us as individuals or whatever, but it's fear of the dangerous new politics that we represent from their point of view, and the movements on the streets and everything. You do see that. And then to kind of cover up that fear and to respond to that fear, there's an attitude of obviously complete dismissiveness, of trying to make a joke out of it, trying to diminish what you're saying, and just, ridiculous stuff, you know what I mean? And that brings you back to the heckling. Like, it's just, juvenile behaviour. I have to say, because I previously was in the European Parliament, which there's lots of problems in the European Parliament. It's even more undemocratic as an institution than the Irish Parliament. But there isn't a culture of heckling, partly because it wouldn't really work because of all the different languages, So it was really quite a shock to me, just the level of heckling. Like, it's just non-stop, And it's really juvenile. It's not witty, like, you know what I mean? If it was witty, then, well, you might have a laugh about it, like, but it's not at all. It's fairly pathetic, And it's obviously, it's particularly reserved for those that they, the technical group, the independents, the small left parties, would get most of it. But in particular women, there's a real sexist element to it, in my opinion. the way Ruth Coppin was treated, or Mary Lou McDonald was treated, or Claire Daly, or Joan Collins. They're treated worse than men with the same political viewpoint, and it's because they're women. Definitely, in my opinion. It's just, I'd say someone could do a study of like the decibel level of heckling when female TDs are raising critical points versus male, and it's actually very, very noticeable, you know.
I'm a big believer of exposure and exposing, you know, certain people, because once it gets out in the public, people kind of learn about these things. Is there any names that you want to say in particular? Anybody in particular that you might want to say who's pretty bad at heckling? Because he probably has a constituency somewhere in Ireland, and people are voting for certain individuals, not knowing that they're like childish behaviour in the Dáil, and they're just like, you know, spoilt little kids.
Yeah, well, I'd say the number one heckler who does the most heckling of the worst quality is probably Emmett Stagg of the Labour Party, and it's illustrative, you know, and because Emmett Stagg comes from the left of the Labour Party. Say when our predecessors, the predecessors of the Socialist Party, were previously, you know, the furthest left people within the Labour Party, and we would have worked with people like Emmett Stagg in a broader left inside the Labour Party, and he had quite a left position, and it's typical. It's like Pat Rabbit or Gilmore. Is that those who come from a left position and then completely sell out, they're the most vociferous in their hatred for the genuine left, because it's kind of a conscience to them. It reminds them of what they previously stood for, and now the only way they can rationalise their sellout of those ideas is by diminishing, ridiculing, making light of precisely those ideas in the form of the people who now embody to some extent those ideas, you know. And so it's really the ones who are most vitriolic are generally all from the Labour Party, and in particular those who were previously to some degree on the left of the Labour Party or in the Workers' Party, which was to the left of the Labour Party.
Interesting, alright. And these people have family, partners, children. You know, it's unbelievable to think that, you know, these people are in there apparently or supposedly representing the people, and they're acting like big children. Immature children, I'll say that. Steve?
Yeah, Emmett Stagg, do you remember? I don't know, again, I know you were in London for a while, but I don't know, do you remember back in it could have been the late 80s, maybe early 90s, the incident in the Phoenix Park with Emmett Stagg?
No.
You don't remember that? No.
No.
Yeah, do you remember that one, Paul?
I've heard of it, I know the outlines of it, but I think I remember going to school on the day that it was on. It was like that had happened, it was reported or whatever, but I was young.
Yeah. Well, anyone who wants to find out, Google, I was going to say Google it, but go on to a search engine and type in Emmett Stagg at Phoenix Park. It's an interesting story. He was caught in the park anyway, but that's his own business.
Okay,
that's his own business. Right, Chris is wondering, Paul, can you ask Paul, how can the world system be changed? And by the world system, Chris means the issuing of fiat currency by central banks, which seem to own everything.
Well, I don't think there's anything wrong with fiat currency. I don't think the currency has to be backed by gold to be effective. But I think the main problem that we need to change with central banks is that they're currently supposedly independent. You know, this is part of the neoliberal counter-revolution, in effect. It's, you know, part of the Chicago School doctrine, the Friedman Knight Thatcherite doctrine, is the idea that central banks should be independent. And what that means in reality is that they're independent of any democratic oversight, any check whatsoever, but completely dependent upon the interests of the bankers in general and the financial markets. And the result is that the European Central Bank, right, was explicitly established with a mandate not to care about unemployment at all, only to care about inflation, which is what the right-wingers all profess to care about, is inflation. And it has driven like right-wing neoliberal policies in a very extreme way across Europe. And it's been at the heart of effective coups to take out previous governments in Italy and in Greece and replace them with governments of bankers. In the last month, they effectively threatened to bring down the Greek banking system if Syriza didn't tear up the election program that it was voted in on. So I think one of the number one things you want to do with the financial architecture is to re-establish democratic central banks that are accountable to democratic institutions, because they're not at all. I mean, they're completely unaccountable now. And in that way, you could use central banks actually as an instrument for society as a whole, issuing currency in the interest of society, as determined by those who are elected, on a accountable, recallable basis, etc., etc. I think that's one of the first things you need to do.
Well, it'd be credit-based currency and not without interest, and nationalise the banking system.
Yeah, although again, I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with interest necessarily. I mean, I don't buy these kind of zeitgeist type theories that fetishize money and think that the nature of our money system is the root of all our problems. I don't think it is. I think there's aspects of it that are true, and it's like they've got some insights, but then that are extrapolated too far in terms of then identifying all the root of the evils there. Whereas, like, fundamentally, I think you could have, differential credit interest rates, in the sense of for small businesses, small farmers, etc. You'd offer credit at extremely low rates, whereas you'd have higher rates for big business, for bankers, etc. But also, the way to end the power, you can't break the power of the financial markets without taking the key financial institutions, which is banks, hedge funds, major bondholders, into public ownership. And if you do that, then what's currently a negative becomes a plus. Then you have this major weapon that's currently used against the interests of people, but you could actually use it in the interests of people. And the problem in the last number of years is that it's been really exposed that societies are being run for banks. But if you had them in public ownership, you could really use them as, effectively utilities, public utilities, and you use them in the interest of society rather than the other way around.
But the problem is, Paul, is the interest is the thing that's causing the problem, because the interest doesn't exist. That's what I'm saying. If you actually have a credit-based currency, if the interest is causing a problem because it doesn't exist. And this is why you have to look at something like the mathematically perfected economy as a system to implement, where it's actually we have a credit-based system, and the interest, you charge a small admin fee which comes out of the actual payment. So say you go and buy a property, say for 50,000, there's a 10% admin fee, but that actually comes out of the actual money, because when you start charging interest that doesn't actually exist, that's where the Ponzi scheme starts and the pyramid scheme starts, and that's why we're in trouble at the moment. And the currency is devaluing, and it's the way. As long as they keep chucking people down the bottom of the pyramid, it'll keep going. But at the moment, it's not, and that's why we're in the debt we are. That's why we're in the problem. The interest is the cause of the problem. So I think, and like there's economists out there who know the system much better than I do, but the fundamentals of why we're in the trouble we are and why the currency is devaluing and never goes back up is because of the interest, because it's a massive Ponzi scheme. But that's my understanding of it.
Well, again, look, there's economists that know it much better than I do as well, who also would dispute that. Like, say, I'm reading a book at the moment by a guy called Kostas Lipavitsas, and a German guy who's a Greek guy, and a guy called something Flassbeck who's a German. It's called, what's it called? It'd be important to get the name. Anyway, if people look up those two names, they'll get really, really excellent stuff. It's very recent. It's just since Syriza got elected. And it's about how Syriza could really take on the EU establishment and break from austerity policies and move in a radically different direction. And in it, they do speak about deflation in Europe, and they root, say, the deflation that is currently being experienced in the EU. They do argue it's not due to credit or money supply or anything like that. They say it's rooted in the decline in wages. That unit labour cost is the prime determinant of inflation or deflation rates, and that effectively, if you look at, you've got obviously a global crisis of capitalism, but within it you have a particular crisis of European capitalism, and that is rooted in like massive attacks on German wages and conditions in the early 2000s, which drove down unit labour costs in Germany and made Germany more competitive, German capitalism, at the expense of like peripheral European capitalism. And now that's being copied elsewhere in Europe. Like the recipe for everyone in Europe is to become more competitive, whereas like competitiveness is a relative thing. Everybody in Europe can't become more competitive. People become more or less competitive relative to each other. So you have like a massive race to the bottom in terms of wages and conditions, and they argue that that's the main reason that you have deflation taking place. And say in America, you do have quantitative easing on a massive scale, but you don't have incredible inflation as a result for it. You do have a level of inflation, but you don't have the kind of inflation that those who say it's all down to money supply would say the result is.
Well, we could. I know we could. I could jump in and I could talk more about that, but we're going to go to the questions because otherwise the listeners will go mad. Steve.
Right, there's a couple of questions actually here in relation to the whole banking thing and banks, but I think it's just going to lead us back down that same avenue, so I'm going to just avoid those for the moment. Have a nice easy one. This is from Babs and Sam. What about the motion that was passed by Dublin City Council to free the 5? How come they aren't free, Paul?
Well, because Dublin City Council unfortunately doesn't get to say who's free and who's not free. So it's a political motion. I mean, the councils have no power in this country in reality. They're very, very limited power. But they do have power to pass motions which express their opinion. Their opinion isn't actionable, there's no consequences to it. But it is a good thing to pass it because it creates political pressure on the government and on the judiciary. And so, you know what I mean? Nobody should be under any illusion about the significance of it. And arguably, if the result of the motion being passed was that the people would have been released, well then maybe some of those who voted for it wouldn't have voted for it. They knew the limited consequences. But it still is good, and it's a sign of the shift of balance of power in a lot of the councils against the traditional establishment parties. And like apparently, because say we have a councillor, Michael O'Brien, on Dublin City Council, he said that like the Fianna Gaelers and Labour and some of the Fianna Fáilers were just appalled, you know, because it cuts across this illusion of separation of powers, that like the judiciary is completely over there, separate from the government, separate from the Dáil, separate from the police, and it's a nonsense. It's not real, you know what I mean? They don't have to be all on the phone to each other, but they reflect the same interests, and so it's perfectly okay for a council to pass a motion. But the way apparently, you know what I mean, the establishment figures were just really appalled because they thought it was like an interference in the independence of the judiciary or something like that.
Yeah. Okay, Steve.
Yeah, okay. Amanda from People's Internet Radio is wondering, does Paul believe that he is standing for the people in a way that will save lives, and would he give his own if he had to, if that was the only way to save a family from being killed?
Well, in the abstract, yes, I'd say that would be the right thing to do. I mean, I'd say nobody is capable of predicting exactly what they do in those circumstances, but certainly if that situation arose, I'd like to think I would do the right thing.
I think we'd all like to think that we do the right thing, but you know, it's only when you're faced with something that you know you can have some reservations. But anyway, Paul, John J from PIR is wondering, please ask Paul his opinion on water fluoridation. Are you for or against?
I'm against it. I don't buy some of the conspiracy theories that go with it. Some of those people who are against it. You know, some people think that fluoridation is like mind control and all this kind of crack, and I just don't believe that it is. But I'm against it because I don't think I think it has a marginal benefit in terms of dental hygiene, but it also has, from my reading of it, a slightly more marginal negative in terms of dental hygiene, but also like skeletal hygiene. The issue of fluorosis, from the reading that I did and the people I discussed with, seems to be the most serious issue. So I'd be against it. And I mean, it's clearly not necessary. Ireland is the only country in the EU to have fluoridation. So it's, you know, really not. We shouldn't have fluoridation, and we should get rid of fluoridation, absolutely.
Plus the fact we could save the country probably something like 10 million.
Yeah,
absolutely. We're not the only ones in Europe. I think 10% of the UK have it, and I think it's something like 4% of Spain, and Czechoslovakia. I can't remember what Czechoslovakia is now. I think they either had or have it. I can't remember. I know they have high cancer rates, and it was attributed to that. That again, that's not me saying, that was a study that was done. But we actually do have, just kind of sideline from that, we actually do have an Irish scientist, Declan Waugh. He has done a lot of research on that, and if you're ever looking for someone to maybe give you, you know, if you want to call it the conspiracy theorist side, I don't know, but an alternative side will be Declan Waugh. He's a man, he's an Irish scientist. He has tons and tons of information, all kind of his own research anyway.
Can I just jump in there? Just something, Paul, I don't want to teach Granny to suck eggs, but, you know, the whole idea of open your mind is about opening your mind. And we have said time and time again on the show, and we've had experts on the show, that there is a difference between, research and an opinion. And we're kind of very careful that if we do give an opinion, we say it's our opinion. But if new information comes in, or information comes in that contradicts what we say, well then we're happy to change it. We call this a fluid belief system. We don't have a structured belief system, so we don't defend anything. It's all about part of the education process for us from a learning point of view. And I think that everybody has to be very careful that when we do make statements or give an opinion, that we kind of say, we put a kind of proviso on it to say, that's what I know now. Based on what I've seen, that's what I know now, but maybe tomorrow might be different because more new information might come in. Because to make a statement on certain topics, if you don't know the full facts, we can assume that we might know, but a lot of the time we don't. So just, I know there's people on the chat room there, they're not happy with what you said there about the fluoride. And so I'm just kind of saying, we try and say we try and educate people and we try and practice it ourselves, that we wouldn't knock something unless we have information, enough research done to make an opinion on it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, everything I say, right, is subject to that proviso. One has to come up with a worldview and come to opinions on things without having the ability to fully research everything 100%, or even that necessarily we have all the information as mankind about everything right now. So everything is subject to further scientific research, evidence, whatever, definitely. But then we have to, on the basis of the information that we do have, we can't be paralyzed by a lack of full information about whatever. You have to form opinions on the basis of the information that you have, and if you think it's reasonably sound, then you have to be willing to act on those, while always willing to change your opinion based on new evidence. And so I definitely agree with the proviso.
Good, okay. There's a couple of questions here that were sent in to us before the show started. And one of them is, can you ask Paul his opinion on the private insurance of money? Private insurance of money. Does that make sense to you?
It would need to be unpacked a bit as a selection of words.
Right, okay. Well, maybe it's got to do with I think, by the sound of it, it's maybe got to do with Alan Kelly talking about privatising the health insurance?
Ah, okay. Yeah, I mean, this massive, drive towards effectively American model of healthcare, whereby people are pushed into private health insurance. That's, this thing called universal health insurance that they have delayed, but it's still coming down the line. And what that's about is about forcing people to have health insurance, and that places health insurance companies that are, for-profit corporations between people and the health service. And it means that they'll be the ones that take decisions about basically what kind of care people are able to access. And so it's extremely, we already have, obviously everyone knows an awful health system in Ireland, and you already have a 2 or 3 tier health service. But this is going to make it significantly worse. Obviously, the point is people should be entitled to decent, public, property-funded healthcare. Nobody should have a need for private health insurance, never mind being forced into it.
Okay, Chris wants to know that how aware is Paul regarding the elite and the control, how they control every aspect of our existence? So, kind of how open-minded are you to what's going on globally with, the elites or the oligarchs?
I think I'm pretty aware and pretty open-minded about it. I think, look, I'm not on the chat room, but I can imagine people obviously, say groups like Bilderberg Group or whatever, these things exist, I don't think that the power of the elite in our society flows from the fact that they're at such meetings. Instead, I think the reason people are at the meetings is because they have power. And power, in my opinion, fundamentally flows from the 1%'s control of the economy. It's fundamentally, there's other aspects to it, but it's fundamentally economic. Is the control over the financial markets, the control of the big corporations. That's where the decisive power rests in our society. There was a study done recently, it was reported in, I think, New Scientist, and it was a study about transnational corporations, and it found something like 100 transnational corporations control something like 40%, 50%, of like all the different companies, all the different economic activities around the world. It's some incredible figure. And I think that's true. You have a huge concentration of economic power, and then those people effectively have the key political power. In the list of companies, it's the big banks, and it's major oil companies and companies like, you know, Kraft Foods, who have all these, like, own almost all food production, that kind of thing. I think that's in my opinion where the main power rests within capitalist society, and then they have their political representatives in the establishment parties who reflect the interests of them.
Well, yeah, I think that's good enough to talk about. I mean, we could go down the rabbit hole a bit deeper, but I don't think it'd be appropriate to do it tonight. Steve, you have more questions for Paul?
Yeah, we do have some more questions. I don't know, I can't remember who this one came in from, but it just says, does Paul use the Constitution when fighting the water meters?
I don't think. I mean, if it comes to court cases, obviously we'll use whatever legal arguments and let's see and let's try them. I don't personally think, based on the legal knowledge I have and the discussions we've had with lawyers, that there is anything in the Constitution that enables us to say that water meters are unconstitutional or something like that. So we use anything we can, but the Constitution is not some great document. It's really not. It's quite a reactionary document, you know. All the good stuff in the Constitution is effectively it doesn't really, there's a word for it which I forget, but there's a word for you to learn when you do constitutional law. Basically it means it doesn't mean anything. It's not really worth anything to anybody. And like the bad stuff, that's all, that does mean something. You know what I mean? The right to private property is absolutely sanctified, and they don't mean the right of people not to get a water meter. What they mean is the right of Dennis O'Brien to own, you know what I mean, all the media in this country and get away with it.
Speaking of law, Paul, it is true, isn't it, that you actually studied law? You have a degree in law.
That is true.
Yeah, no, that's just grand. Just thrown out there, so people kind of know, like, that when you're kind of talking about law, that it's not just an opinion, that you do have some substance, you have some legal training anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't mean I'm always right, and obviously nothing I'm saying is legal advice. And like, kind of, to be honest, in law, they teach you how to find the information as opposed to memorizing all the stuff. And I'm a bit rusty at it, but I have a basic idea of how the stuff works, alright, which it's helpful in the, you know what I mean, in terms of dealing with all these campaigns and stuff.
Yeah. But the question is, do we have law, or do we have cronyism? Because it seems to be what we've heard through certain people that we've interviewed on the show and who've been in Irish courts, is that they just go from the common law to legalese and back again, just trying to change the system so it suits themselves.
Yeah, well, I think we do have law, right? But it's a law made in the interest, written by those who represent the 1%, and the judiciary generally come from those who represent the 1%, and so it's made by, you know, a certain group of people in a certain class interest, and then it's implemented by with a similar viewpoint in mind. So it's no wonder. I mean, say as an MEP or also as a TD, I like a huge number of people you meet who have suffered significant injustices, really, you know, in like all sorts of different ways. And people have been through the courts forever and forever, going, you know, every appeal possible and whatever. And just often people don't find justice in the courts. And it's just, there isn't necessarily justice to be found in the courts. And sometimes, that's the discussion we have to have with people. It's like, unfortunately, like, you're in the right here from what we can tell, but unfortunately, you're not going to find justice through this avenue. You know what I mean? We're not fundamentally going to win on all these campaigns, in my opinion, through coming up with the best possible legal argument. And say that the jailing, or the sentencing to jail of the 5 kind of illustrates that, how the whole, if you play by their rules, you're going to lose because the whole thing is stacked against you. Yeah,
I totally agree. Steve?
Yeah, Delamitri on People's Internet Radio was wondering, Paul, are you enjoying being a TD, and do you feel you have affected change?
I'm not enjoying being a TD, really. I think, to be honest, enjoyment would be the wrong reason for people to do it. I mean, I enjoy the campaigning work and the increased campaigning work I can do as a result of being a TD. But being a TD itself, being in the Dáil, listening to all the heckles and stuff, you know what I mean? It's not really what you choose to spend your day doing. But I do think I've helped to achieve change. You know, it's not some individual thing, but like, I definitely think, like, just even by itself, even if I'd done nothing since being elected, and obviously I think I have, but even if I hadn't, I think just the act of me being elected was a big enough blow to the water charges. It just sent this message that the government saw, because the fact that it came on the same day as the first big protest, the government thought, oh wow, this is actually a big deal, and seats could be lost on this issue. A government could fall on this issue. It sent shockwaves through to them. And then I think since then, I think I've managed to use the Dáil, but also kind of the media platform that can come with the Dáil reasonably effectively to get across some key ideas, to popularise the idea of non-payment, which I think we've been doing successfully during the election campaign and since then, to popularise the idea that people have a right to protest and kind of defending the right of people to protest against media backlash, and then trying to raise like broader political points about the need for fundamental change.
Well, I definitely think the TDs, the likes of yourself, Joe, Claire, Mick, Ruth, have a voice for the people in the Dáil where we never had before. So it's a major change and a major shift in a positive way, that you're exposing and you're coming out with things in the Dáil and addressing issues that we all want to see addressed, that we never had. We've never seen this before. Well, I've never seen it. In the years I've seen the Dáil and TDs in the Dáil, I've never ever seen the Dáil as so active for the people as it is now. So it's a credit to you that you and the technical group for what you are doing.
Yeah, and it's only going to get better in my opinion, in the sense, well, for the foreseeable future, things are moving more left rather than less. Yeah, I think in the next Dáil, and that's one of our big strategic goals is that there can be, say, 20-25 serious anti-water charges, anti-austerity, genuine left TDs. And even without, a left government, which I think is what we need, but even without that can be quite a powerful force. I mean, you can already see how a relatively small number of TDs has helped to shake things up and helped to give people confidence to be involved in struggle outside the Dáil. A bigger number can do that to a greater extent, and it can really polarise debate in this country between the right, neoliberal orthodoxy, and the left.
Well,
so
I think, yeah, I think one thing I did say in the show a couple of weeks ago, and I'd like to see it if it's at all possible, is and I want you to, I'm going to give you the crystal ball. I say, if you had the crystal ball, what do you see happening in the next year coming up to the election? But my own opinion, and this is just my own opinion from what it's worth and what I've seen, is that if we had more independents that were involved in the technical group, who then got together and did a mandate for the people to bring in the likes of, direct democracy, representative democracy, the proper that we had in 1919, and just get away from these parties, these party whip systems, who are just self-service, service to self, and they don't care about the people. They never have cared about the people and never will. And as long as we keep voting them in, they'll keep doing what they're doing and screwing the system. So it would be great to see more independents get together in the technical group with a mandate from the people to say, this is what we're going to be doing if we get in. But let's say we have a crystal ball. What do you see happening in the next year up to this so-called election that's going to be called by Enda?
I think the next big thing is March 21st. I think we'll see tens of thousands on the street in the next big protest against the water charges. That's very important. Then the most important thing, and it's really the most important thing, is that the bills drop in April for the water charges. The question is, can we convince enough people not to pay? I think we probably can. I personally think, it's all to play for, but at the moment the opinion polls say that 3 in 10 won't pay, 4 in 10 intend to pay, and the rest say I don't know and it depends. And that depends on us. It depends on us getting the message out there that people can refuse to pay with no penalties. Like you were saying at the start of the show, there's no consequences whatsoever for people refusing to pay. There's no penalties for non-payment until July of 2016. So people should join the boycott. And so I think if we get a good boycott, I think a good boycott's 30%. I think a very good boycott is high 30s, 40%. And I think a boycott that will really shake the government on Irish Water and potentially bring the government down is like 50% plus. And so I think if we're in somewhere in that ballpark, and I think we will be somewhere, then water charges re-emerges as the key issue. I think the government limps on for as long as it can, and then goes for an election, either the end of this year after they put in a budget with a few things to try and give the impression that they're giving something back, or they have an election next February, like has been reported. And then I think the key question in the election is whether what we want to happen is that absolutely the anti-austerity alliance, other lefts, be they independents or groups like People for Profit Lines, should come together. But most importantly, we should come together with like people who've just got involved now in the last 6 months and last year in fighting against the water charges, and loads of different campaigns, be they called Can't Pay, Won't Pay, be they called We Won't Pay, Says No, Right to Water, it doesn't matter. But they should stand in the elections as part of a broader platform against the water charges, against austerity, as part of calling for non-payment and a vision of like really building this into a strong campaign. And if they do, they could do extremely well. I mean, people could win seats who have never stood for elections before and be part of a real transformation of Irish politics.
Excellent. Now, we have a good few questions come in, and we need to quick fire them because we're going to be running out of time. So, Steve, if we can quick fire them and we get a quick answer off you, if possible, that'd be great. Steve.
Right, okay. We do have a few. I know we are kind of tight for time, so we're going to kick off. This one from Siobhan, seemingly. Siobhan, hi Siobhan, it's Joan. It's complicated. Anyway, but the government don't care, as they will leave with big pensions. This is if and when the next general election comes around. They don't care. They're going to leave. They're going to have big pensions. And if Paul got into power, would Paul change this idea of politics? I'm guessing that's the question of the big pensions when they leave.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, politicians should not be entitled to the kind of massive pensions that they're entitled to. They should get it should be treated exactly the same as, well, one, they should obviously only be on, in my opinion, an average worker's wage in the first place. A pension should reflect that. And it should be the equivalent of doing, if you worked as a civil servant on an average worker's wage for 5 years for a full term or 10 years, the equivalent pension right should accrue as opposed to the massive pensions.
Yeah.
Definitely that would be one of the first things that you'd want to change.
Excellent. Good answer. Martin is wondering, can you ask Paul, is this government just a provisional government, and are we still being ruled by the Crown?
I think we're being ruled by international capital and European capital in particular, and then our crappy kind of Irish capitalism. That's where power fundamentally lies. In terms of where governmental power lies, I mean, our government is a government. You can call it provisional if you want, but I think it's really just semantics, It has governmental power. It's bad. It operates against the interests of ordinary people, but I don't think it's particularly useful to go focus on saying, oh, you're only a provisional government. Do you know what I mean? But they have won elections, and they shouldn't have won elections, but they have won elections. Yeah.
Okay. Ray Hall is wondering on People's Internet Radio, does Paul believe that we should have a Burn the Water Bills challenge?
Yes, if done in a very safe way. We're going to do, there's a thing called the Non-Payment Network, which is a bringing together of all the non-payment groups across the country. And so we're organising a protest for the 18th of April, so after the bills have come out. And it's a bin your bills protest, but on the stage, the plan is, at this stage, we do need to work out the details, but to burn a massive bill, as well as collecting bills from people, get people to bring bills in to the protest and burn them in a massive burner at the top of the crowd.
Excellent. I think we'll all be there on that day. Where are we now? We have return to sender. Would Paul use, or would you advocate the use of return to sender? Again, we know it's not legal advice. Yeah,
so I mean, it's up to people themselves. The main thing is for people not to engage with the bills when they come out. Personally, I think the best option is simply not to send them back at all. To rip them up, burn them, do whatever you want to do with them, because it is a fact that the ones that went return to sender in the registration, which obviously people were doing as a protest, and that's cool, that's not a problem, but the Irish Water has counted them as part of their returns, So I think it illustrates probably people are better off not doing that. But I mean, I don't think it really matters. The main thing is not to pay.
Yeah, well, I think we have heard that before, that they have used those return to senders as part of their numbers when they're crunching the numbers, the people who have done returns. But I mean, at the end of the day, once they actually get down to brass tacks and they start going through the information, and there's no information on it, so I think they'll get the gist then. Anyway, we'll continue on. In relation, when we spoke earlier about again, this is going back into the whole money thing, and Vin was just wondering, Vin on PIR was wondering, would Paul accept an invitation to have a look at a presentation of MPE, that is the Mathematical Perfected Economy?
I would, yeah.
You would? Okay, that's good.
I'm banging on, and I'll take a look at it. Yeah, definitely, I promise.
Yeah, well, look, you're only a young man, so you've plenty of time. You've plenty of time to I don't know, to get to grips with all this sort of stuff. But then again, I suppose people have to remember, you have to have a life as well, so you're going to have to take it in small doses, I suppose. Well, anyway, just kind of to finalise, we have a comment. This kind of echoes a lot of comments on both of the chat rooms. I'm just going to read out this one from Chris because I think it echoes everyone's anyway. Will you thank Paul for answering my questions? I believe we need more like him. Great guest and defo one for the pub crawl. The pub crawl is just a fictitious pub crawl that we have going.
It's a virtual pub crawl.
If your name goes on the pub crawl list, you've swung the listeners.
You're part of the gang. Paul, just another thing that probably away from the Irish Water protesting, but just something that Vin said there. We've had guests on the show. We've had experts. We have scientists on. We have medical doctors on. We have professors on talking about the dangers of certain technologies, wireless technologies, and Tetra radios, what the police are using here at the moment in Ireland. Now that was a 17-year experiment, and they use Tetra radio over in the UK. They've been using it longer in the UK, and a lot of the police over there have been coming down with tumours and cancers and stuff like that. And we've had Barry Trower on, who's a physicist and a scientist, along with a number of other experts on the show talking about this technology. And Irish Water are using wireless devices in their meters, and Barry come on the show and told us about the concerns he has about them, and we have all these interviews available to be listened to, and we're happy to send you over a link so you can, if you have the time to listen to, or even if you want to talk to Barry direct, or talk to Ollie Johansson or to Dr. George Carlo. We've had a number of guests on. Now the reason why I'm saying this, Paul, is because the Gardai, unknowns to them, are using a communication system that the government has put in place that is actually going to be a danger to them. And this has been confirmed. I mean, in 1 week, there were 7 police officers up with Barry Trower concerned about the health aspects of this technology. And it's something that it was never said, and never will be said, because when Pat Robert was communications minister in the Dáil, they had something like 850 million contracts they signed with the 4G mobile network company. So they had no interest in releasing this information. It's a bit like the asbestos and the thalidomide in the 60s, where they didn't want to say anything, and then all of a sudden we find out 20 years later, 30 years later, that they're actually dangerous. This is the same with the actual Tetra technology, and the Gardai are out there using this technology, going into police stations with massive masks. And we know that the Gardai are coming down, certain Gardais are coming down with illnesses. And even the GRA, which is the Gardai Representative Association, are not acknowledging this. Is this something that you could possibly look at, or have you come across this before?
I'd be happy to look at it. Definitely send on the interviews and stuff. I mean, I haven't looked at it in terms of the Gardai thing. In terms of the water meter thing, we have looked into it a bit. I mean, and we talked to some people, and we drew the conclusion that it wasn't really a serious concern, in the sense that, but I'm open to, people sending me stuff about it, whatever, but in the sense that it's only emitting information, whenever the van is coming close to it, then it clicks on, then it effectively, sends the information about how much water has been used from the meter to the van, and then it turns itself back off again. So that was my understanding, is that it's not generally emitting stuff. But I'm happy to be, confounded in my knowledge of that.
I think what we'll do is, I know you're probably limited for time, because being a TD you would be. So I think the best thing we could do is we'll send you over the contact information. Actually, we can ring Barry direct, and you can have a chat with him on the phone, and then he might put you straight on a couple of things. Being a physicist and a scientist, the guy was trained by the UK government. He's an expert in microwave warfare. Microwave technology is a specialty. As I say, it's not just Barry. We've had a number of guests on the show who are experts in this field and are concerned about it. And now there is a group over here, a group of doctors and Irish medical doctors who are concerned about this technology as well. and they did send a flyer out to all the schools warning about the technology, and they just get ignored by the educational system. The education system, the department, just ignored it. Now, we don't have time to go into the history, the whys and wherefores, but we can definitely sit down and talk to you about it, because if the Gardai realised that the technology they're using is actually causing health issues with members in the force, and the GRA and the people at the top are just ignoring it and saying, oh, sure, you're fine, it's nothing got to do with that, it's something else, it could be your diet, then surely the Gardai would actually be, they might wake up and might realise, hang on a minute, not only are we being manipulated and controlled by the people at the top against their own people, but they're trying to kill us at the same time with this technology.
I'm definitely happy to have a look at it.
Brilliant. Okay, we'll see what we can sort out for you. Steve, you got a question there?
This is just it's more of a comment than a question, Paul. Well, it's kind of both actually, and I know we weren't going to take any more questions, but this one just popped up on People's Internet Radio, and I thought it was very, very interesting because it's from Vin, and Vin he does a lot of studying in relation to law, and he will be kind of someone who would know a thing or two, and Vin was just wondering, he'd like to see you make a public statement on Article 4.5 in the Constitution with regard to eviction, and where are we now? Or let us know, is he aware of the difference between positive law where mentioned in the Constitution?
It rings a bell, but I have to say it's not on the tip of my tongue, and I'll look into Article 5.4.
Because
40.5.
I remember Vin
40.5, is it?
Yeah.
I remember Vin talking about the difference between a house and a dwelling, and the dwelling in the Constitution is inviolable in accordance to law. Now, obviously, there's the whole idea of the banks and all these repossessions are civil matters as opposed to criminal matters, but yet that seems to be overlooked, and the registrar comes down with the hired thugs and starts to take over the repossession of the house. Are you aware of, have you looked at this? I'm sure there's people come into you and talk to me about evictions and concerned about it. Is this something that you looked into?
Well, say I've opened it up here, right? The Article 40.5. So the dwelling of every citizen is inviolable and shall not be forcibly entered save in accordance with law. But I would presume, I'd have to check, but I definitely presume that people have attempted to use this in cases of evictions, and certainly in many cases the judges have stood over evictions. And what they will argue is that, well, in accordance with law, we've designed these laws whereby banks can kick people out of their homes. And that's, you know what I mean? There is a point, right, to attempting to find holes in the law, loopholes, and to use them. But it has to be part of a framework that understands that the whole system is rigged. The laws are made against people. Like, we can't appeal, generally speaking, to good law against bad law. The laws generally are bad. The laws generally operate in the interest of the rich. And those who interpret the laws are the courts, as in the judges, who are appointed by the ruling party of the day. And so, you know what I mean? Like, yes, we need to come up with the best legal arguments possible. I am genuinely for all that. But, like, ultimately evictions, need to be stopped, like, through massive political pressure, which will include people physically, refusing to leave their homes, getting friends, neighbours, etc., and using those cases to illustrate the injustice of what's happening.
I think, again, going back to what you're doing in the Dáil and exposing and talking about stuff openly so people can see what's being said is a big, it's a massive thing. I don't think people realise that. I mean, I've said it before on the show, any secret society that has been exposed through history has never lasted. And the more we expose, and whistleblowers, the whistleblowers are getting a hell of a time, the likes of, what's his name, Wilson. John Wilson, yeah. And but we need more and more people to come forward and to expose what's going on, because that's only then can we start kind of looking at sorting the problems out as well. Once it's come out and once people acknowledge it and it comes out in the public. And I'm sure you and your colleagues in the technical group, you have been doing a great job of doing that, and I'm sure you'll carry on doing it.
Yeah, that's the plan. That's the role of the Dáil, is to really expose things as much as possible. That's the point about it being a platform. We don't have the illusion that we're going to convince the government. You know what I mean? I mean, the government gets everything through that it wants in the Dáil. It passes all the laws that it wants to, in the interest of the 1% generally. But our power, the power of it is as a platform, understanding the power of people outside the Dáil and being mobilised, and that's it. I mean, if you can use the position in a small way to give people confidence, to struggle to put forward tactics and strategies that are able to beat this onslaught of attacks against people, well then it provides it's a service that is being done as part of the more general movement.
Okay, so one last question before we let you go. The crystal ball for the year, what do you see happening coming up to this so-called election?
Well, you got your water charges, you got your boycott, you've got,
more spin from the government?
I'm sure you have more spin from the government. Something to watch out for, which may be just two issues that may be just political kind of hiccups for the government potentially, is on the one hand, the potential for this inquiry into Callanan, the Garda commissioner, seemingly being forced to resign, is certainly what it looks like. And that may cause real problems for the government. You just got to watch out for that. And the other thing I think we should definitely watch out for is the Eurostat test. This thing that they have to prove that they're getting 50%.
Sign up
50% of their money revenue is coming from private sources other than the government.
Yeah.
And if there's mass non-payment, they may not be able to pass that test, and that could trigger a major crisis for the government. Again, I think it's likely that they'll find a way of presenting it in such a way that they won't have that crisis. But you just can't rule out either of those things being major hiccups.
Well, that's brilliant. Well, I have an auntie who's 86 and she's not paying. So, fair play to her, because I talked to her the other day about it and she said, I haven't done anything, I don't really want to pay. And she's 86, God bless her. Paul, it's been a pleasure having you on the show, and it's been great information. We appreciate your honesty. And, and best of luck with all the stuff that you do and everything that's coming up. And if we can do anything, or you want to get the message out there, by all means, give us a shout. We're more than happy to do that. We will send you over the contact information and touch base with you on that, because I think that is something that really that shell needs to be cracked. I think the Gardai really need to be told that they're being, sold up the river with the technology they're using. And we are speaking from a point of view that we have done a lot of research on this and spoke to a lot of people about it, but we can touch base on it. But thanks a lot for coming on. We're going to pass you off to Steve. Steve's going to get all your details there and all your links and stuff like that. Steve?
Yeah, Paul, great information. It really has been mind-opening, mind-altering. And just like Irish Water, we're going to get your details now. So if you can start off with your PPS number, or failing that, just your website where people can find out more information.
Don't even know my PPS number. Actually, at the moment, my websites are not in great order. So the best place people can get me is on Facebook. My page, because my personal Facebook profile is full. I can't accept any more friends. But my page is Paul Murphy TD.
That's all one word, Paul Murphy TD.
Paul Murphy TD. So yeah, I think Facebook.com/Paul Murphy TD. If people search it, they should be able to find it. Or on Twitter, I'm at Paul Murphy AAA.
I'm just trying to type that down.
Yeah,
that's all one word again, Paul Murphy AAA.
Yeah.
Brilliant stuff. And you're going to be, obviously, are you working on your website at the moment?
Yeah. There's a website which is Vote Paul Murphy 2014 or paulmurphy2014.com, but it's fairly outdated. We need to get a new one up. Although it's funny because just increasingly social media is so much more important than websites. Obviously, websites is where, your longer articles and your blogs and that kind of stuff goes, but social media is really where it's at. But
brilliant stuff. Okay, Paul, well, listen, thanks a lot for coming on. Just stay with us there for a few minutes. Now, we're going over to a song that was sent in to us. We don't normally say in OYM, we're happy to promote people that don't have a record contract or want to get their own music out there. And so we have a song that's been sent in. So we let you hear this song. It's about a local town and the issues that they're going through in the local town. And Steve has all the details, but we'll tell you what all the details are after the song. So we'll catch you after this.
This is Open Your Mind Radio on OYMradio.com, UnitedWeStrike.com and PeoplesInternetRadio.com.
And we're back. Yeah, as someone said on PIR, you can't beat the old songs. Well, you can't. There's a lot of truth in those old songs. Anyway, that song was My Old Town. It was by, is it Michael McGinty?
McGinty, yeah.
Michael hails from Kilcormac in County Offaly. And he sent over his song to us, and over his long career he has appeared with the likes of Daniel O'Donnell and other legends of the Irish music scene. He regularly gigs in London, hotspots, often with John Hamilton, and that's in brackets here, Shamrock, Tell Me Ma.
Remember
I think
song?
we all know that one, Tell Me Ma when I get home,
Yeah.
something or other, because I can't remember. And he wrote My Old Town, and he produced it in his London studio. That's EQ Studios. And if you are a songwriter, a budding songwriter, and you have anything down on, I don't know, vinyl, digital music, digital, not vinyl. We can't accept vinyl, the turntables are broke. We will be happy to promote or play your music. So just give us a shout on info@oymradio.com or 046 927 1212, and we'll talk to you about that. Alan.
Brilliant, Steve. Okay, just a quickie. Maybe people know about the fact that there's going to be a massive solar eclipse on March the 20th. It says the UK will be plunged into darkness. Biggest blackout since 1999. Starts around 9 a.m. Now, I remember the last time that happened. I was actually in Putney in London. And I came out onto the road with my 2 pieces of white paper. You actually punch a hole in one and you focus them and you actually see the eclipse with the 2 pieces of white paper. And I was in Putney at the time and I remember I was seeing it and it was very weird. You know, like we were in the middle of the day, but it was just that kind of eerie kind of, you know, it was just eerie. So apparently it's going to happen again on the 20th of March at around 9 a.m. So we'll have to, keep an eye out for that. Now, next week's show, we have retired ex-detective constable Gary Heseltine coming on the show. We haven't had Gary on for a while. And I don't know, people are into different things. But we do have a high number of listeners on the show who are into that side of things as well. Now, Gary runs the Prufo website for the police in the UK. Yes, there is an actual database, believe it or not, of UFO sightings and experiences with the police in the UK, and Gary's running that. And there's been massive sightings over the last couple of years. The level of sightings coming in is phenomenal. And Gary doesn't deal with conspiracy theories. He doesn't have time for that. He doesn't have time for kind of hearsay. He wants evidence, and he wants proper evidence. He's a detective. That's just the way he works. So we're going to get Gary on. We're going to have a talk to him about what's been happening over the last couple of years because, OYM, we have emails and we have Facebook accounts and people send us links and all that kind of stuff. And it's just amazing, the amount that's coming in. It's phenomenal. It's a massive increase. Plus, on TV as well, the general media and TV, it seems to be all about aliens and everything else for some reason. I don't know.
And zombies.
And zombies, yeah, zombie apocalypse and all this. All this stuff is going on. It's just incredible. So I don't know whether they're trying to tell us something, slowly but surely something's going to happen. I don't know. But we'll find out from Gary anyway. What are you up to during the week besides helping me fix the stream on OYM? Just to let you know there's a job there.
Yeah, I'm going to be fairly busy during the week. I have a lot of things to do, just work-wise. I was going to just mention this to you maybe after the show, but we may as well address it now. From Snowdrop. Snowdrop's wondering what's the situation with the site. Do we have to open a new account? I think you said to me earlier, no, that all the chat room has remained the same, so nobody should have to open a new account. Surely not?
No, but what I think I'll do is during the week I'm going to clear down the account. So maybe you can still log into the chat. It's going to be there, but maybe next Friday or Saturday, by that time the accounts would have been cleared. I plan to do it probably tomorrow, if not Tuesday. And then you can go along, and if you click on register as a guest and there's no password required, you can just log in and you'll have a clean name. So, that's the way we'll do it and see how you get on, see if you can get in. So you don't actually have to wait till next week to log in. You can actually set it up beforehand and give it a test. But don't do anything for the next few days anyway, because I'll be working on it and I'll clear down the user account and we'll do it that way. Just so, because I know one or two people, we normally have a few more people on the chat and maybe they couldn't get in. I know one or two people have been saying it, so we'll do that, we'll clear it down. It's all part of the teething problems. We got a new website, what can you do? That's what we do, but there you go. And don't forget that the Facebook account, you don't actually have to have a Facebook account to see the OYM Facebook. You can go over to the Facebook page without actually having to have a Facebook account. So just keep that in mind, because we do post a few things up there of interest.
And for anyone who does have Facebook, I mentioned this a few weeks ago, I'm going to mention it again. When you're on Facebook and you're finished doing your Facebooking, go up to the little icon on the right hand side and actually log out of Facebook. Because if you don't, Facebook monitor every page that you visit and everything that you do on the internet after that. Now, of course, they say it's an algorithm and they target you with ads based on what you look for after that. But you know, if you're kind of concerned about, well, if you're going to be concerned about privacy, don't use Facebook at all. But if you do, yeah, well, just log out when you're done. It may work, it may not work, I don't know. But it's recommended anyway. And Scene.is is kind of the alternative to Facebook. We're over there as well. A lot of people are actually over there. Again, it's kind of like Facebook, but it's in Iceland. It's away from kind of corporate control, if you like, so to speak. That's Scene, SEEN.is, if you want to check us out there. I think we're just OYM Radio, are we? Yeah,
there seems to be a little debate about that. Whether it is in Iceland or not, or whether it's a kind of a, you know, sleight of hand trick. I don't know. Yeah. You know, we'll keep. Who knows? Let's keep things open.
Keep your wits about you.
Right. Okay. We're going to head over to PIR. Who's on with Vin tonight? You know?
I haven't a clue.
Haven't a clue.
I'm sorry, I haven't a clue. I did put that question up earlier, and I don't know if Vin's reply escaped me or eluded me. But it's always good. Vin always has good guests on, and even if it's only Vin on by himself, he does a good show. We told him well.
Okay, take care. Have a safe week. This is Alan James. We'll talk to you next week. Keep sending in the links. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Okay, from myself, Stephen George, have a great week, and we'll do it all again in 7 days. Good night.